I'm Christopher C. York, instructor of philosophy at Langara College.
And I'm Zan Plesner. I'm a student at Langara College.
And this is Synthesis and Sophistry.
I took far too many notes.
Yes, probably. But
That's
good,
just
though,
trying to decipher what he was saying.
because you're going to have to carry this one.
I'll try my best. Do you want to introduce our topic?
Yes, on this week's required reading episode, we're looking at Martin Heidegger's The Question Concerning Technology, for which I blame, again, Zan for bringing this to me. It's probably the only article that we've considered thus far that I'm actively hostile towards. So I should maybe put my cards on the table as usual, right down from the beginning of the podcast.
Okay. Your hostility, is it just his impenetrable language or the topic itself?
It's a number of things that I'll get into. I feel like maybe at first you should try to just give us the potted summary of the article, though, and then we can sort of dig into my various critiques and criticisms. And
Okay, so stop me if I get anything wrong, because this is definitely an article that you have to interpret and try and understand. It's quite dense in its language, and the topic itself, he kind of takes words, definitions, and builds upon his concepts with them. So if you miss a definition, you're in big trouble, and I'm sure I missed a definition. With that aside, his thesis, as I understand it, okay, I'll take a crack at it. It is that technology changes humanity and changes how we interact with the world and what it means to be in the world. I think central to his idea, he doesn't bring it up in this, is his idea of Dasein. And Dasein is the being that is concerned about its being or questions the world. And we are Dasein. So technology fundamentally changes what it means to be in the world and what Dasein is. And he sees this as a problem because what he's interested in is, from what I remember when we discussed Dasein, he's looking to a primordial being, a fundamental ontology, which is the study of existence or being in the world. So he wants to try and find a fundamental way of being, if I'm understanding him correctly. And technology takes us away from this or puts up certain barriers, which he calls, I think the central point in the essay is what he calls gestel, or enframing. Each piece of technology inframes and gives a certain hue our experience of the world. So that's his kind of gripe broadly.
yeah, and this idea of a framework, it's borrowed from Immanuel Kant, right? The idea that you can't see the world without a certain set of parameters in place cognitively, right? So we can't experience the world without a sort of pre-conceptual, let's say, intuitive almost understanding of space and time, right? That's how everything presents itself to us. Nothing presents itself to us aspatially or atemporally. And it seems like this inframing device that Heidegger's using is coming at us from the same sort of way, right? So like when we're talking about Let me see. I'm going to try to find a passage that we can talk about. This is going to be this is going to be tough going, right? We're going to have to dig into the thickets of what he's writing. But I feel like before we even get to the inframing, I feel like we have to look at the big picture. Mm-hmm. The big picture. So before we go anywhere with Heidegger, we have to talk about Nazi stuff, right? So this is a notable biographical detail about Heidegger, his association with the Nazi Party, and I feel like we can't really discuss Heidegger without talking about his Nazism in the same way we can't talk about O.J. Simpson without the sort of wife murdering controversy surrounding O.J. There's a certain tarnish. Allegedly, there's a certain tarnish to the reputation, and even if it's not the main data point, right? We at least have to address the elephant in the room, and so I want to say a few things about this, right? The first of which is that despite the Nazi stuff, we still have to look at the conceptual content of a philosopher's work, right? We talked about this a little bit with reference to Carl Schmitt. And we don't want to commit the ad hominem fallacy, right? By saying just because this person has an odious political affiliation, they have nothing important or relevant to say. Now, the rightness or wrongness of Heidegger will depend on separate things from his affiliation with the regime, right? Like, so the grounding on which we evaluate him is not just a political grounding, right? So, what's a good example here? You could say, for example, on certain things, Hitler was right. When, for example, he answered 3 p.m. when he was asked what time it was, and it was 3 p.m. right at the time that he answered. So
you got me a little worried there for a second.
That's the point. But obviously, he was wrong about many other things, right? But the philosophical point at stake here, right, is that Hitler's rightness or wrongness, they're predicated on other grounds than his Hitler-ness.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. So then the same thing applies to Heidegger, right? By the same brush. Mm-hmm. So we're acknowledging the awfulness of his his marred reputation by affiliation with this odious regime. But at the same time, we are sort of moving past that. Now, I do think it's important to acknowledge that a career is lessened, if not ruined, if it is won at the cost of a political victim, right? So give me, for an example, a piece of outrageous clothing.
For me, like those sunglasses that like 50-year-old dudes driving speedboats wear. Can you picture them?
I imagine they're huge.
Yeah, very big.
Okay, so let's say that the big sunglasses party takes over Langara College, right? And so all of my non-sunglass wearing colleagues are dismissed by the president of the college, and I get myself a big fancy pair of sunglasses, and I do my best to sort of like fall in line with the regime. Now, presumably, right? I mean, this is the position of Jewish people in Nazi Germany. They're discriminated against by not, being the right kind of people to get promoted. I'm going to say that if I fall in line with the sunglass regime at Langara in this hypothetical future awful world, my accomplishments at Langara would be diminished, right, by this kind of like just falling in line with a totalitarian regime. And so, by proxy, you can see that the accomplishments of somebody when they're bought at somebody else's freedom to flourish is objectionable. So that's something we want to definitely at least acknowledge here.
Yeah, I think it's important anytime we're talking about Heidegger to acknowledge his biography, because, I think it's odious, and he strikes me politically, especially. I'm not super familiar with his biography, but I know that Husserl was his teacher and was Jewish, and Heidegger kind of just threw him under the bus, and I think there's a certain amount of cowardice there, and I think people as well have pointed to the fact his big project is that design, right? Find that primordial being, and they've talked about how that is wrapped up in his Nazism, trying to say this is the right way of being in the world. And how that can tie into Nazi ideology, right? And I think it's important to be honest about that. And this is why in philosophy we don't worship anyone. We look at everyone critically.
Right, which brings us to the second point.
Mm-hmm.
So my other big picture comment about Heidegger is that he comes to us from deep within the camp of what we would call continental philosophers. And so let's talk about this distinction, right? So analytic philosophers, traditionally speaking, have prioritized careful argumentation, rigor, and the pursuit of, objective truths, right? Continental philosophy, traditionally speaking, has been a bit more permissive, let's say, of intellectual peregrinations, less rigorous, perhaps more self-indulgent explorations of subjective states or experiences. At worst, continental philosophy, by parody, can be a word association game gone wrong, a kind of evocation rather than a formulation of ideas. And of course, my favorite, Bernard Suits, he in his book Return of the Grasshopper, he dedicates a chapter, an appendix to this deconstruction of Derrida, another continental philosopher, via the Mary Had a Little Lamb poem. He goes on and says, in Mary you have the Virgin, in the Lamb you have the image of Jesus, and the blood of the Lamb. And he kind of like finds this religious and sort of deep religious subtext in the children's rhyme, and makes fun of Derrida as finding traces in works. And I don't know. I mean, you could do a parody of it. Give me something to riff on. Give me some topic, any topic.
Just that maybe like someone overinterprets.
Or just give me any pop culture.
Star Wars.
Star Wars. Good. Excellent. Okay, so here's maybe the worst kind of parodiable look at continental philosophy. So you say, well, in Luke you have a trace of the word look, and Luke is looking. He's looking for his absent father, which is something that we all do. And can't we say that the religious urge is a search for an absent father? And traveling into space is, it's a metaphor for ascending to heaven, right? And becoming a Jedi is having the mystical experience which permits you to...
I see where you're going.
You could go on,
this.
right? So, and again, none of this is argumentation, right? All of this is just rather a loose association. And maybe you can say, okay, well, that was a valid and not logically valid, obviously, but it was it was a germane exploration of the topic. Thank you very much for your time. But you might also just rightly accuse me of wasting your time. And that's kind of how I felt about this essay.
Yeah. Just him going too deep into etymology and trying to make arguments from etymology.
Exactly. It's the same reason, I suppose, that I have difficulty when people begin their philosophy essays with, according to Webster's dictionary,
Yeah.
the word meaning means, right? It's not very illuminating. Right. Yes, of course, these words have these associations, and we use words to create associations as meaning valuing and meaning generating beings. We do this all the time, but to say that there is substantive philosophical content in the way that a word has been used in itself with no other buttressing seems a bit sloppy.
Yeah. Yeah, or just kind of distracting from, in the case of Heidegger, from his point. It's, I find with this essay and with his writing in general, you have to be really careful because he's going towards a point, but he will do this etymology, talk about Greek words and their roots.
Right.
And then... So he's kind of sidelining you in a way, but eventually he does bring it back. And
yeah, this is often used. The verb form of a noun is often used.
Yes.
Right. So the nothings.
Yes.
Right. The essence is evinced in essencing. Right. And this kind of he forms a chain of these terms. Right. So we go from on page number. What is it? Let me just check here. It's a longish kind of passage. So we go from presencing on page 9 to bringing forth on page 10 to occasioning on page 11 and also revealing, right? And it's a chain of, these garands and where is the chain going, right? And you can tell from some of the passages, maybe Heidegger himself doesn't really know, and I think that's fine, right? Because he says, look, from the very beginning, from page 1, he says, questioning builds a way. He's not claiming to have an ultimate answer here, but he's asking a series of questions and sort of following wherever language leads.
Yeah. I guess if I'm to defend Heidegger's...
Please do, yeah. Methodology?
Methodology. Thank you. That's the word I was looking for. What I like about it is that he's almost paying homage to the intellectual traditions that he's pulling from the ancient Greeks. Like, he starts out with Aristotle's Four Causes because he's trying to find the essence of technology. And he points towards the instrumentality. That's usually how we define a piece of technology, right? A hammer, piece of technology, what's it used for? Hammering nails. And so to try and dig down into what the essence is, he looks at Aristotle's Four Causes.
This is on page number, for those following along at home, it's on page number 6. Yeah, the material cause, the formal cause, the final cause or end, and the efficient cause of a thing.
Yeah.
Right. So he does, and he borrows these from Aristotle and then sort of riffs on them, right? He says, why are there just 4 causes? In relation to the aforementioned 4, what does cause really mean? From whence does it come that the causal character of the 4 causes is so unifiably determined that they belong together? So, he's sort of looking deeper into the ancient Greek philosophy of causes and wondering what is the deeper or unifying thread between all of these kinds of causes. And he suspects that, he gives an example. First of all, he gives the example of the chalice, which is illuminating, right? He says, look, if you want to talk about a chalice, the matter is silver, the form is a cup, the end is the religious ceremony that it's created for, and the cause is the silversmith. But that might not, that might not ground deeper causes, right? So if the end of its construction is a religious ceremony, there's the deeper matter of, well, why religion, right? Well, there's a deeper cause behind all of this, yes. Right? If you're Aristotle, you're going to say it's God. Yeah. That's the absolute end of the causal chain. But from this, right, that's where Heidegger gets into this idea that there are objects in the world that we can kind of analyze via their presencing, right? So here's something that's presented itself to me from this presencing. What can I learn about it, right? How can I dig into it? And then he sort of very quickly moves into the idea of a bringing forth or poiesis. And occasioning, right? So occasioning has to do, okay, I'm going to read on page 11, this passage, which I've written in a rather unflattering note in the margin. I have written bullshit. So I'll read you the session. What is the bringing forth in which the fourfold way of occasioning plays? Occasioning has to do with the presencing of that which at any given time comes to appearance in bringing forth. Bringing forth brings hither out of concealment forth into unconcealment. Bringing forth comes to pass only insofar as something concealed comes into unconcealment. The coming rests and moves freely within what we call revealing. Now, that's a lot of ink wasted on what could be, right? If he wasn't such an obscurantist, and I think that's a philosophical vice, by the way. He's just saying that, stuff exists that we could look at and look into and investigate.
Yeah.
Right. So what does the move from occasioning to bringing forth to revealing, what's that doing?
Yeah. What does that entail?
Well, I mean, I see there's a rhythm, right? There's a poetic rhythm that's occurring, but I don't really see the cognitive load that it's carrying.
Yeah.
It's a bit more like, he's just kind of like swishing his hands through the water and making waves, but it doesn't signify much to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think that's why for Heidegger, like reading a paragraph, I really don't get much from it. It does seem a lot like gobbledygook, but zooming out and kind of taking the piece as a whole is where I think I'm better able to understand things. Because like that passage you just read, nothing sunk in for me.
Well, that's the thing. Like, even if it did, right, it's just a series of assertions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's not, it doesn't really, you'll say, you don't contest it as an argument. You contest it as a series of assertions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I see.
So it doesn't really hang together.
Yeah. Okay. He's just kind of stating things. Just
stating stuff the way that he sees it, which has value, of course. I mean, I'm not saying like this is valueless, but I'm saying that it's murky rather than lucid reading, and its murkiness is not its virtue.
Yes.
Right. It's working against the material. But then again, you might say, well, what is the material, right? So if you're going to defend Heidegger against my charge of bullshit, you need to show me, right? Where does the spade, hit pay dirt?
Yeah. I think where that's at for me is how he builds up these different definitions to form an argument. I think the ones that are most important is that of standing reserve. He calls standing reserve those resources that are to be seen to be in use of technology.
Yes. But this is like a military term, right?
Yeah. But he's using it as a way to view nature. Different technology that we create, as if I understand it, has what he calls a challenging dimension to it. Once it's created, it challenges nature in a way almost hostile to it.
Yeah. And this is brought out in a nice piece on page 16, right, where he talks about the Rhine River. Right? He says, even the Rhine itself appears as something at our command. The hydroelectric plant is not built into the Rhine River as was the old wooden bridge that joined bank with bank for hundreds of years. Rather, the river is dammed up into the power plant. What the river is now, namely a water power supplier, derives from out of the essence of the power station. In order that we may even remotely consider the monstrousness that reigns here, let us ponder a moment the contrast that speaks out of the two titles, the Rhine as dammed up into the power works, and the Rhine as out of the artwork in Holderlin's hymn by that name.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think for him, the Rhine is obviously a very important thing to German people. So rather than seeing it as this river, as this thing that has all these meanings to him, it becomes something to be used, to be harnessed. And this is what he calls standing reserve. Once we see resources or the earth as something to be used in the service of creating or powering technologies.
And this is the way that we operate when we are in the instrumental frame of mind, right? And that's potentially a dangerous way to approach, let's say, everything in the world, right? It's kind of like the capitalists seeing everything by its dollar value that miss out on a sort of many other sorts of value that exist in things and in people. But do humans have a choice about this, right? Are we just wired to see things in this instrumental way? Or is there an alternate inframing that we can partake of that allows us to not subject the Rhine to our instrumental frame?
I think his answer to that is that we do have a choice in how we orient ourselves towards technology. It's not like some sort of fatalism where we build some machine and no matter what we do, it has this purpose that we're going to bring about. For him, again, if I'm reading him correctly, he's saying that we have to be...
And to be clear, neither of us are Heidegger scholars.
No, I'm far from it.
We are Heidegger speculators.
Yes.
In today's podcast.
We are Heidegger trying to figure out what the hell he's saying.
Yes.
But in order for us to not be under the sway of technology and just totally unfree, we need to be aware of the inframing, as he calls it, that it bestows upon us. So at one point he talks about physics and how when we view everything under a view of matter and energy and physical substance, that changes how we act towards the world and helps us to instrumentalize everything. So being aware of this is the alternative to just letting technology turn us and the world into totally instrumental.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where he goes in the last couple of pages of the essay, and looks to poetry and art as a sort of alternate way of looking at the world, right? So I'm going to read here from the last page. Could it be that the fine arts are called to poetic revealing? Could it be that revealing lays claim to the arts most primally, so that they are, for their part, may expressly foster the growth of the saving power, may awaken and found anew our look into that which grants our trust in it? Whether art may be granted this highest possibility of its essence in the midst of its extreme danger, no one can tell. Yet we can be astounded. So it seems to me that the subjective experience of astonishment is very different phenomenologically from the instrumental frame, which is trying to understand, master, and use.
Yeah, and obviously, phenomenology is very important to Heidegger. So I think it's interesting that, yeah, he turns towards art in the end, because he says it has a lot of the same features as technology in that it enframes the world.
I mean, I suppose the difference is that I'm always going to default to the instrumental mode when I need something, and I will need something every time I'm hungry or thirsty or need to use the washroom or am impoverished in some way, right? And so like the instrumental frame, at least in this world that we're in, right, where material goods are not super abundantly accessible, that is going to be where most of us spend a lot of our time. And so that's why the Rhine has been harnessed as a source of hydroelectric power. Right? It's not because we thought it would be a cool art project to dam up the river. It's because it serves some end. And now, presumably, right, if you say that, well, the Rhine is the Rhine, it's a beautiful, intrinsically valuable, natural object. Yes. And wouldn't it be better if, like Holderline, we were all able to just rest in that intrinsic valuing of nature? But I think that that's the exception rather than the rule for a lot of us. Right? I mean, if we have an hour a day to dedicate to aesthetic contemplation, some of us feel like we're lucky in comparison with a great majority of human civilization that is geared towards just making ends meet in a very hand-to-mouth way.
Yeah, I think you've pointed to something that's a problem for Heidegger that I was thinking about when he uses the example of the Rhine. He's giving nature an intrinsic value because of its aesthetic appeal. And I think there's other philosophers. I just took environmental ethics with Rana Ahmed, and we talked about other ways of giving nature intrinsic value that aren't so wishy-washy or dependent on one's subjective experience. Someone like a deep ecologist or a biocentrist might be able to help Heidegger out there in saying that nature or things that are to be used by technology have some intrinsic value and should be considered in other ways rather than just their instrumental value to humankind.
Yeah. I mean, I think maybe on top of that, you can say that if you do see the danger in, let's say, the instrumental mode, we should be working for ways to arrive at a post-scarcity civilization so that we can free ourselves up for just that kind of, let's say, experience of the world that doesn't prioritize that. So, I mean, I think that like any person from a privileged class who's writing something normative that is supposed to apply to the rest of humanity, it's just a little bit skewed. Yeah. Right? Like, so it's kind of like a professor of English literature going down to the docks and telling the dock workers that they need to dedicate 4 hours a day to reading the classics of Western literature in order to live an active life of the mind. It's condescending, it's unrealistic, and you wonder, right, where did this urge come from, and why do they think it's appropriate to express it? And so when we're talking about, like, I get the general idea, right? We don't want to see everything in nature strip-mined and dammed up and tied to immediate human use and need. That's an ugly world. And unfortunately, you look out in the world, a lot of the world's been annexed to exactly that kind of use. It's nice to have preserves where we can forest bathe and get away from this nightmare of instrumentality. But then again, the responsibility for changing that in framing is once again put squarely on the shoulders of the individual. Whereas I feel like maybe it's more of a policy issue rather than just change the way you see the world, man. Well, the way I see the world is bound up with all of this socio-political stuff that makes food hard to get and rent difficult to pay. Yeah. And so, forgive me if I, live largely in the instrumental mode.
Yeah.
But that's where a lot of us have to live.
Yeah. I definitely...
Instead of reading Holderline on the banks of the Rhine, enjoying our picnic.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely see your point, and it's one that I agree with, right? Rather than trying to individually reorient ourselves, looking at systematic issues is usually the way to go. But I do think there's still space for that, and it is important in how we change our perspective on things. Maybe not quite to fetishizing the Rhine or having such a subjective outlook on things. But I guess to this point, and it's rich coming from Heidegger, but he talks about how one danger in technology is that it has the potential for us to see other people as standing reserve, or things with instrumental value to service technology. We can see that nowadays in a lot of ways. Like,
you're saying this is a blind spot for him?
I think that I just think it's ironic that he would maybe not ironic, but that he would have this worry yet still be a Nazi.
Yeah. Fair dues. That is putting him on the horns of a dilemma there. I think that he says at one passage, though, that we are immune to this. I'm going to try to find the passage.
All right.
Okay, so my quote is on my version from page 18, right? And he says, precisely because man is challenged more originally than are the energies of nature, that is, into the process of ordering, he is never transformed into a mere standing reserve. Since man drives technology forward, he takes part in ordering as a way of revealing. So to me, that passage, and again, I'm not saying that Heidegger doesn't contradict himself. He may very well. But in this passage, at least, he seems to say that this kind of being turned into a mere object of instrumental use or scientific inquiry is impossible, because we are directing this inquiry. Again, I think that's probably false as well, but it is an assertion that he makes. It's interesting. He says that humans are challenged more originally than are the energies of nature, and here I'm seeing like that's, again, I think referring to the design, right, and the idea that we are constantly investigating the nature of our own being and experience.
Yeah. For him, I think he was the one who talked about thrownness, how you kind of just are thrown into the world one day and you realize, oh, I exist, and you have to confront that. That's kind of what that invokes for me. I guess, one thing that, one small sentence that I actually really liked, he said, "The will to mastery becomes all the more urgent the more technology threatens to slip from human control." And I think that's one of the points for this essay that kind of hit me. I was thinking about things like the nuclear bomb, or even just cell phones, like how much that has changed our experience, and how widely it's used and used in different ways. And I don't think that's necessarily a negative thing, but it changes things deeply. And it's something that we want to try and control.
Well, yeah, I mean, it actually kind of resounds with me as someone who's recently come out of a relationship, right? The will to master becomes all the more urgent the more technology threatens to slip from human control. I mean, I think that anything that you lose control of, that you once had some say in, presents itself as a I suppose a challenge, as Heidegger would put it, to you. But then again, you say like, well, this will to master, how much of us being human relies on this expression of this will to master, right? How much of our psychological well-being, how much of our existential self-actualization rests on acting on this will to mastery? I mean, if we ignored it completely, we'd be utterly passive and probably not flourishing. At the same time, it does seem wise at a certain time, at a certain point, if we can, to let things go and to appreciate them for what they are. And I think that's the perspective, both of, Holderline on the bank of the Rhine and me post-breakup. Right? I can see the thing for what it was without trying to get a hold of it.
Yeah, okay. So kind of having like an in-between his idealistic, like seeing things as valuable in themselves versus the...
Yeah, the Nietzschean, will to power, or what he calls here the will to mastery. It's a certain expression of what it means to create meaning in the world, right? Via the exertion of your own capacities. But one of the capacities that isn't mentioned very often is the capacity for release, right? I mean, if you do, compulsively try to advance mastery of all things in all areas of your life, I think that possibly it's a monstrous and aesthetically unappealing life, right? It's a life without grace. It's the life of a panting dog who chases every car that drives by the porch.
Yeah.
Right? There's a certain quiet dignity in a dog who knows that those cars are not to be caught. Or the holder line that knows that this river is too magnificent to be dammed.
Yeah. But I guess certain technologies that have become available to us are so powerful that we can't really ignore them, and we need to master them at some level. Well, one worry that many people have had on a wide scale is the fact that you can create genetic mutations a lot easier nowadays just by looking at instructions. So it's becoming more and more available for people to be able to construct pandemics if they would like. And that's something that we would like to have mastery over. And maybe that's less of mastery on a technological issue, or more of policy or enforcement. But I think there's plenty of technologies nowadays that are so powerful that we need to have a level of control over it.
Yeah, I mean, certainly we have a plethora of reasons to be anxious about the things that are out with our control in the contemporary political climate. We could worry ourselves to the point where we're all sleepless all the time.
Yeah.
But that seems unwise.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, I see your point.
So, there's one thing to crave mastery, and there's another thing to commit oneself to achieving mastery at all times, at all costs.
I guess I'm thinking about this more on a collective level rather than individual level, like humanity trying to master the nuclear bomb.
Right. But that's an abstract kind of struggle.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, there's no one particular actor that you're naming there. So it's a bit more like there's a reification of humanity as this sort of giant organism that is somehow, working towards this goal, but that's not really how most individuals that constitute humanity imagine their personal struggle, right? Like the story of my life is trying to master atomic weapons. Yeah. Not many people are going to report that to you when you say, what's meaningful in your life? What gives it shape and direction? I mean, they might, in a kind of abstract way like myself, say, well, I grew up in the shadow of a potential nuclear holocaust. And that informed a lot of my early, let's say, anxieties and motivation. But I think in my adult life, probably it would be wrong to say that I've been struggling to achieve nuclear mastery.
Yeah.
If so, I've been doing it the wrong way. I've been doing it in a technically unintelligent way. If that's my aim.
The same way that Heidegger writes, you're trying to have mastery over the nuclear bomb. Just rather than going point A to point B, you go point A to...
Well, it's like trying to open a jar of pickles by driving around the block.
Yeah.
Right. Not much chance of getting there.
Yeah.
With what I've been doing.
Yeah. All right. I had a few other notes. Maybe was there anything you wanted to bring up, or you're ready to just throw this in the trash?
I mean, there are some sections where I've written in the margins some unkind things, which may be humorous. I'm not sure. There's a certain page where I wrote, "This is the drunk uncle at the party who won't let anybody else speak and refuses to shut up himself, even though he's got nothing to say." This is on my page 27. Right. Here he's saying, "In truth, however, precisely nowhere does man today any longer encounter himself, that is his essence." Right, which sort of raises some questions like, was there ever a time where we encounter our own essence? Now in today's world, unfortunately, we don't see our essence lying around. And he continues, "Man stands so decisively in attendance on the challenging forth of inframing that he does not apprehend inframing as a claim." Of course, like that. What, this is somehow a failing of man that he, Again, it's all couched in this obtuse idiolect that he's developed through this article. It confronted me as just a block of presumptuous, tendentious claptrap.
Yeah. I remember reading that and thinking, because he does have a normative sort of stance. Oh, we're getting away further from our
the old
primordial self, but he never finished his project of trying to understand Dasein, because in my opinion you fundamentally can't. Humans don't have a fundamental essence, in my view, and that was his lifelong project, right?
But I mean, it's a classic example of asking the wrong kind of research question, right? And so if you looked at the parameters of your research at the very beginning and said, what am I trying to do here? Oh, wait, it's impossible. Then maybe it's not a great program of research, right? Maybe try something else. But again, to say that, it just seems like a grumpy old dude, right? Saying, well, with the old ways of we could once approach our essence, now we can't do that anymore. Well, again, it's all just assertions and not much in the way of argumentation. So I did get frustrated.
Yeah.
At different points through the text, but I won't go through all the sort of rude comments I put in the margins. But there are more. Again, the content of the piece is couched in such obscure prose and held together so tenuously that I find it, again, this is potentially the most hostile that I'll ever be to any author that we consider. It really just falls apart in your fingers. like a philosophical phyllo pastry. And leaving crumbs all over the floor.
this is good to know that Heidegger really just pushes those buttons. I've never seen you so flustered before. You you seem hostile, angry.
Yeah. He's. I mean, look. So, I one thing that I really resent is somebody wasting my time.
Yeah.
And I feel like in this article, Heidegger's wasting so much of my time.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like the point is plain enough. You could say this in 500 words.
Yep. Yeah.
And be done with it.
Yeah.
And all the fluff doesn't add anything to the substantive point, right? He's investigating what technology means. He arrives at his own sort of set of stipulated terms. He makes some insane leaps of logic, and then pushes us towards a conclusion that we should, look at things more, from the point of view of intrinsic or artistic aesthetic values than instrumental. Yeah. It's a long, messy trip to get to a destination that is not that interesting.
Yeah.
So I'm just gritted my teeth all the way through this article.
Well, I thank you for being a trooper and finishing it.
And it's raining outside in Vancouver here today, and it's the week where I'm doing my taxes and reading Heidegger, and
when it rains, it pours.
When it rains, it pours.
All right. Well, thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Sam. Appreciate it.
All right.